Right now, it feels like global democracy is down bad, like Dallas Mavericks bad. It feels like we're at the halftime in the game of global democracy, and the pro-democracy team is down 10 points. But it's not just here in the United States. It's happening around the world. In India, the world's largest democracy, strongman Narendra Modi was just reelected to a third term, although he did lose his majority in parliament for the first time in 10 years. In Mexico, the Morena party, which has worked to dismantle democratic institutions, won in a landslide victory this month. And this week, far-right populists swept the European Parliament elections, particularly in France. All the brown areas you see in this map are the towns and cities where far-right parties secured the most votes. Now, President Emmanuel Macron has called a snap legislative election that threatens to hand power to Marine Le Pen's right-wing National Party. So with Donald Trump on the ballot again here at home, it feels like now is the time for the United States to keep the world from going off the deep end this November. Susan Rice served as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and as national security advisor to President Obama. She most recently served as domestic policy advisor to President Biden. She joins me now. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm going to ask you first. I know you were at the G7. There's some excellent things that were accomplished there this week that we're going to talk about. But I'm going to ask you to talk me off the ledge. I'm a political scientist. I'm a comparative politician. Comparative politics was my area of study. And I see these rightward twins. I see what happened in South Africa. I see what happened in Mexico. It seems like the only bright spot for democracy might be the British elections in early July and maybe what happens here. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that democracy is not with its back up to the wall right now.
Well, Jason, it's good to be with you. I do think you're actually somewhat wrong. I think it's a mixed bag that we're seeing internationally. You say South Africa is a bad story. I think quite the opposite. The fact that the ANC, which has ruled for 3 decades, lost its majority and is now having to form a coalition is the advance of democracy. I think the fact that Narendra Modi, who is widely expected to sweep in India, lost many seats, and lost in particular in the areas where he tried to use anti-Muslim hate as a key platform, key element of his platform. In Europe, I think the results were mixed. If you look at the overall composition of the European Parliament, it's changed only marginally. And while there were setbacks, certainly in Germany and France, there were advances in the Nordics and places like Hungary. So I think that this is a moment where democracy is under threat, not just in the United States, but in many parts of the world. But democracy is also showing its resilience. And in places, interestingly, where we've seen strong men and largely one-party rule for many years, there seems to be something of a trend of a backlash against that. Now, what matters enormously, of course, is what happens in the United States, because we are the world's leading democracy, and the world looks to us for leadership, and historically we have provided that leadership. But democracy is definitely on the ballot in the United States, with Donald Trump as wanting to rule, as he said, as a dictator on day one, who's promised to pardon the insurrectionists that he incited at the Capitol. He's only become more unhinged and more dangerous. He's now a convicted felon who completely disregards the rule of law. So very much it's the case that here in the United States, we have a test of our own democracy, and that democracy must prevail under Joe Biden.
So we're taking a look at some of these G7 numbers. We have a stat here. If we look at the approval ratings of many of the G7 leaders, Olaf Scholz, Justin Trudeau, Macron, Meloni, Biden, they're not very popular. And these are democracies. These are some of our biggest sort of economic, some of them are our military allies. From your perspective, Ambassador, why do you think many of these leaders are currently so unpopular with their constituents? Is it frustration about the global economy? Is it that people don't feel effectively represented? Because I can run down policy lists of great things to say Joe Biden has accomplished, but he, like many of these leaders, still seem to be underwater.
Wait, Jason, let's not confuse whether democracy is under threat with whether incumbents might be more or less popular at any given moment in time. Democracy is about the competition among ideas and among leaders and among parties. So I think the competition is healthy in all of the G7 countries. The question is, will in the United States we re-elect Joe Biden, who is clearly and plainly committed to the rule of law, believes that the Constitution matters, and that we are bound by the rules that we signed up to? Or will voters return a man who is clearly authoritarian, who says things like Hitler did some good things, who embraces Vladimir Putin as a genius and says that he will support him doing whatever the hell he wants against NATO? This is a man in Donald Trump whose own vice president, secretary of state, secretaries plural, secretaries of defense, national security advisors, and chief of staff all say that they really question whether he is fit to return to the presidency, and none of them have endorsed him. These are the people who worked most closely with him. That tells you a great deal about how dangerous and unhinged Donald Trump is and what a threat he is to our democracy. So Joe Biden has accomplished an enormous amount, as you've said, both internationally and domestically. Just this week, for example, at the G7, he rallied our allies and bolstered international support for Ukraine, imposed new sanctions on Russia and China. So Joe Biden is strengthening our alliances, expanding NATO, making the United States more secure. And Donald Trump is out with his go-it-alone approach that is extremely self-interested, all about, what dictators he can make friends with, on, every day of the week.
Ambassador, I just have to ask you this quickly. You said that part of what's healthy democracy is competition, which is good. But when the person you're competing with doesn't believe in democracy, isn't that inherently one of the dangers? I mean, Joe Biden wins, it's great. But if Joe Biden loses, as we have said, as many Democrats have said, if people care about democracy, that may be the end of democracy in this country if Trump gets back into office, correct?
We're saying the same thing, Jason, yes.
Yes.
But that is that's not the case in Canada. That's not the case in Britain. That's not the case in many of the other countries you named. But here in the United States, absolutely, democracy is on the ballot. And we have a choice between a leader who cares about people, who is working to try to make lives better for working Americans in this country, and has made enormous progress and has every ability to make more progress for the American people,
right,
compared to a man who is completely self-interested and out for himself and against democracy. Exactly.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Suarez. We're tight on time. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.